shifting to Hina, if I might. Your country has been a leading contributor to UN peace operations, as well as obviously a vocal advocate for a more equitable international order that provides greater voice and weight to countries of the global south. I'd like to get your assessment of potential reforms to both the composition and decision rules of the UN Security Council. Traditionalists might argue that actually the Security Council is working just fine because it was basically set up, at least in part, to prevent the collective force of the international community from being used against any one of its most powerful members. But frankly, for the rest of us, I think that there's a sense that that this is simply a license for abuse by the great powers, and that they can hide behind their veto, either for themselves or, frankly, for their allies as well. Do you have thoughts about what could be done to make a more equitable and just order that might involve at the United Nations, and what can be done when the Security Council is blocked? Is there more of a role for the UN General Assembly, which has obviously, in the context of Ukraine, been increasingly asserting itself? Or do you have visions or aspirations for Security Council reform?
Okay, so thank you. And, you know, it's very interesting that sitting in the moment that we're sitting in history right now, where we are perhaps making the most, mistakes of a proportion that history is certainly going to judge us. We're not going to judge ourselves right now. We're going to let it pass. But history is going to certainly stand judge to the moment. And we still think that we can continue to talk about good intentions, our ability to have a just and fair order. I don't think we intend to have a just and fair order. The intention will have to come before anything else. I think we do not will to have a just and fair order. Let's pause for a moment and look at the moment that we're sitting in. We have had Security Council resolutions calling for, I was looking at the title, calling for the protection of civilians and upholding legal and humanitarian obligations, vetoed not once, but already many times since 7th October by countries which are supposed to be the policemen of morality, legality, order, and are supposed to be the ones keeping us away from chaos. So it's really an appalling moment. And I think we need to really absorb it and recognize it. Now, I just want to say that countries who abstained even were 45. Okay, I'm very glad in the second resolution, not in the first one, France wasn't one of the abstainers. But in the first one, even France was. France, UK, US, right? And in the second one, you have still the UK, countries like India, who we are projecting to be the next Security Council members so they can to be the abstainers. And what are we seeking? What is the multilateral system seeking over there through the Security Council resolution? Protection of civilians and upholding legal and humanitarian obligations. So if we cannot, as humanity, come to agree on that, I think we should close the book of how to reform and start questioning our will to do so. At the same time, where, Gassam talked about the word hypocrisy, we see that all over the world being used quite excessively because it should be used. We have, we're sitting here talking about multilateralism, whether it will work or not. We've seen the statement of Antonio Guterres, who happens to be the Secretary General of the United Nations. We know that he said that more journalists have died in the last 3 weeks than in any other conflict, any time in the history of the United Nations. We've seen him say that I think more UN workers have died than any other conflict anywhere, and more journalists have died in the last 3 weeks trying to report than any other conflict since 1992, I believe. And we know that 75% of the 10,000 people who've been killed are women and children. So what I'm saying is that since we all stand by and since we allow this moment to pass, I don't think the system, which is already fractured, will be able to hold. Because the difference I want to also mention, and you mentioned whether it should be the General Assembly and whether that should be empowered, and this is very telling. Because when the same vote goes to the General Assembly, 120 countries are in favor of that. 120 countries. So this shows how the policemen of the world, through the Security Council, etc., are actually quite undemocratically representing the world's wish to move on a crisis like this. And we do have the solution. But first of all, before anything else, I think we have to have the will to have the solutions. I think right now the will to have the solution is absolutely not there. The great power competition is less power competition and more competition to continue its hegemonic, in some ways, sense of entitlement and exceptionalism, which has been very, very costly. And as somebody who sits on the other side of the planet, I can tell you that war has come to Europe now, and you can feel the effects of war. War has been in my parts of the world for the last 3 decades, and we have been seeing its impact. So I am right now at the most pessimistic that I have been in the last 46 years of my life, certainly in the last 22 years since I've been in government. And I feel now we're at a moment where we are at precipice, and something will have to give way. Either this will break completely, and there will be more chaos which will not be managed, because words, you cannot use the language of peace to propagate war anymore. You cannot use the language of security to deliver on insecurity. So it's not going to hold. We got away with it. This is far too much, because we are all watching it. We are all witnessing it as we speak. And I think humanity and humans all over the world are reacting.
Thank you very much. Very eloquent, very